In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Welcome to Grimdark Shards, where the shadows of humanity's fate stretch across a galaxy consumed by eternal conflict. Today, we journey to the forgotten world of Thalax Prime, a planet shrouded by warp storms and haunted by ancient secrets. In this story, of angels and ancients, the war for Thalax Prime, the Dark Angels Space Marines descend upon a world lost to time, only to awaken an undying menace beneath its surface. Prepare to witness heroic sacrifice, hidden sins, and unrelenting Xeno's wrath. Gather your courage, for the battle unfolds now. In the pallid glow of distant stars, strike cruiser sword of Caliban slipped out of warp near a once-forgotten world. Thalax Prime appeared on the bridge's main hololith as a haze-wreathed sphere, half swallowed in perpetual storms. Master Amos stood at the observation port, garbed in his dark green power armor. His gauntleted hand tightened on the hilt of his sheathed power sword. Even for one of the Emperor's angels of death, there was something unsettling about Thalax Prime's sudden re-emergence from warp storms centuries old. The planet's surface readings are stable, reported a nearby officer. Atmosphere breathable, but we're picking up pockets of intense radiation in the northern hemisphere. Possible industrial meltdown sites. No large orbital defenses detected. Interrogator Chaplain Malthus joined Amos, black robes trailing over his plate. A severe man, hollow-cheeked from endless vigils, Malthus's eyes gleamed with fervor. Master, the anomalies in the astropathic transmissions. We suspect the presence of our old foe. He spoke in low Gothic, referencing the Dark Angels' ceaseless hunt for the fallen, those treacherous brethren who had betrayed the Legion millennia ago. Amos's brow creased. That is not our official mission, Chaplain. Perhaps not, Malthus said. Yet you know as well as I, no lead can be ignored. If the fallen walk this world, we must act. Amos nodded, wrestling with the tension between the chapter's public duty, securing Thalax Prime for the Imperium, and its hidden obsession, capturing every last fallen angel. Keep your wits, brother, he cautioned. We are at war not just with heretics, but with time. This planet could harbor Xenos, or worse. He turned away from the port. The swirling orb of Thalax Prime shimmered with sickly luminescence. Prepare for planetfall, Amos ordered. We reclaim Thalax in the Emperor's name, and if old sins await us, so be it. Under the black sky, Dark Angels drop pods screamed through the atmosphere, their retro thrusters howling. They hammered into the cracked asphalt outside the ruins of Nova Thalax, the once main hive city with its spires now half collapsed. Brother Sergeant Nestor was among the first out, bolter at the ready. His Primaris armor still bore fresh chapter insignias, the dark green paint unmarred by centuries of war that marked many of his brethren. Tall basalt walls loomed, carved with half-ruined imperial iconography. On the ramparts, flickers of light signaled the presence of life. Spread out, maintain overwatch, Nestor directed. His squad fanned out swiftly, scanning the rubble with enhanced autosenses. Even in the stifling gloom, the Astartes moved with lethal grace. Broken statues of robed saints lay scattered across the plaza. Rust-choked vehicles and toppled Aquila shrines told the story of centuries of isolation. Suddenly a voice crackled over the vox bead. Unidentified Astartes, identify yourselves or face retaliation. It was a woman's voice, hard-edged, clipped with the accent of a soldier. Nestor signaled for caution. We are the Dark Angels, he replied. We have come to secure Thalax Prime for the Imperium. A moment's silence. Then, out of the shadows along the wall, Battered troopers in patchwork flak armor emerged. They were clearly outclassed by the power-armored giants below, but they did not waver. At the forefront stood Captain Elena Thorne, tall for a mortal, pale from subterranean living, her black hair bound in a ragged braid. "If you truly serve the Emperor," Elena shouted, "then you are welcome. We've prayed for aid long enough." She stepped forward, half lowering her pistol. Behind her, militia with improvised gear shifted nervously. Nestor advanced slowly, removing his helm to reveal stark features and the enhanced eyes of a Primaris Marine. "We have answered your call. The warp storm's cleared. The Imperium has not forgotten you." He scanned her starved expression and realized how desperate these people must be. "What is the situation here?" Elena exhaled, tension draining from her shoulders. "Emperor's mercy, I feared you might be something else. In truth, we do not know what roams the planet's wastes. People vanish at night. We hear rumors of monstrous shapes, unnatural green lights. We thought it might be the living dead or some new chaos abomination. We have held on by faith alone." At that, her gaze flicked to the towering Astartes behind Nestor. Master Amos, flanked by two robed veteran sergeants, strode forward. "We shall see what plagues Thalax," Amos declared, voice resonant with authority. "Gather your forces. We will fortify the city. Then together, we will hunt down these intruders." Elena nodded, relief warring with fear in her eyes. She knew the legends of the Emperor's angels, and how they could be as merciless as they were holy, but she was out of options. As night draped the city, the Dark Angels encamped in the battered central square, establishing perimeter sentry turrets and portable shield generators. Flickers of lightning danced in the distance, painting the spires in ghostly silhouettes. Within a makeshift command post inside a ruined administratum building, Interrogator Chaplain Malthus questioned a local priest for any sign of a robed outsider, but gleaned only cryptic rumors. Meanwhile, Elena gave Master Amos a dire briefing. "The biggest danger is, well, vanishings. Patrols find a shredded uniform, splashes of gore, and no bodies. Always at night. Some survivors claim they saw skeletal figures with glowing eyes, or heard the hum of alien energy, but no proof." At that, Amos's face hardened. "Skeletal figures with green glow. My suspicions are confirmed." Elena frowned. "You think it's Xenos?" "The worst kind. Prepare your militia, Captain. If my chapter's records hold true, the Necrons are upon us. The hush of midnight settled like a funerary shroud. Aching towers and half-toppled cathedra spiked the skyline. The militiamen, hearts pounding, waited in trench lines rigged along the southwestern approaches of Nova Thalax. The Dark Angels had placed them there under the watchful eyes of heavily armed Ravenwing outriders. Brother Sergeant Nestor stood on the fractured upper floor of a hab block that overlooked the approach. Through his helmet's enhanced night vision, he scanned the emptiness. Rubble-strewn streets leading into the remains of an ancient road once used for cargo trains. A withered statue of an imperial saint rose up from a broken fountain. No movement. "Perhaps they won't come," said one of his Marines over the squad comm. Nestor's reply was grim. "If the stories are true, they always come." Then came a hush, as though the wind itself had ceased. A stuttering green glow danced across the top of a distant ridge. Shapes appeared, a line of metallic silhouettes, walking in perfect unison. The faint whir of alien servos carried on the still air. Necrons. They marched in phalanx formation, skeletal warriors whose polished living metal exoskeletons reflected the green hue of their glowing gorse flares. At their center hovered a taller figure with a broad crest. Sparks of emerald crackled along his arms. In the gloom, the human militia wavered. A few voices gasped or muttered prayers. "Fire on my mark," came Master Amos's voice over the Vox network. "Aim for center mass. Concentrate plasma on the leading ranks." The air flashed. Ravenwing bikers roared from side alleys, unleashing plasma talon bursts that ripped into the lead Necrons. The Xenos staggered, but in seconds their self-repair mechanisms knitted limbs back together and they advanced again. Necron Gorse beams flared. A chunk of the hab block disintegrated near Nestor, causing him to drop prone. Dust rained. "Return fire," he barked, swinging his bolt rifle over the ledge. His squad poured a volley into the phalanx. Explosions of goreless metal shards erupted, toppling multiple Necron warriors. Yet many stirred moments later, reassembling from shimmering necrodermis. Down in the trenches, Captain Elena's militia opened up with laser guns. The green beams from the Necrons retaliated, slicing through cover. Elena watched in horror as one of her men was reduced to ash in a split second. Another screamed as his entire left side disintegrated. The rest kept firing, gripping their weapons in white-knuckled terror. A second wave of Xenos shapes flickered behind the warriors. Gaunt horrors with claws slicked in fresh blood. Flayed ones. These twisted parodies of Necrons draped themselves in the flayed flesh of prior victims. They scuttled on all fours, hissing with mindless hunger. They vaulted the debris piles, dropping into the trenches with unholy speed. "Hold the line!" Elena shouted, thrusting her las pistol point blank into a flayed one's chest. She fired repeatedly, blackening its metal ribcage. It turned, eyes blazing malice, just as a Dark Angel veteran shot it in the skull with a bolt pistol, blowing it to shards. Above, the hovering figure extended an ornate staff, arcs of viridian lightning sizzling from the tip. One Stormlance speared a Ravenwing bike, the rider's armor seared away in an instant. The green discharge jumped to a second bike in a chain reaction, sending it crashing in a burst of flame. From his vantage, Nestor recognized the figure's commanding presence. "That must be their overlord," he voxed to Master Amos. In the city center, Amos and interrogator Chaplain Malthus stood with a Devastator squad. Malthus had suspected an overlord's presence. His eyes gleamed with fury. "Necron overlord. He is the key. Destroy him, and their forces may lose cohesion." Amos nodded. "Agreed. Stand ready. Initiating Phase 2. Suddenly, the city's airspace shimmered. A swirl of teleporter energies announced the arrival of the Dark Angel's Deathwing. Clad in bone-white Terminator armor, they materialized behind the Necron line, thunderhammers and stormbolters at the ready. The ground thundered as Deathwing Knights crashed into the metallic ranks, hammers pulverizing Necron torsos in savage arcs. The Overlord turned with inhuman speed, parrying one Terminator's blow with his staff. Green sparks flared. The Overlord then lunged with an ancient war scythe, slicing open the Terminator's breastplate, felling him with a smoking wound. Despite their losses, the combined flanking assault shattered the Necrons' momentum. Their ranks parted in confusion, some phasing out to preserve their forms from irreparable damage. The Overlord, outnumbered, let out a silent snarl of frustration across his emotionless metallic visage, then gestured. In shimmering flashes, the entire Necron force vanished, teleported away. When the dust settled, the Dark Angels surveyed the battered battlefield. Militia troopers, shaken but alive, emerged from trenches strewn with charred bodies. Drones hovered overhead, scanning for leftover Xeno signals. Captain Elena approached Master Amos, blood still spattered on her battered flak armor. They vanished. Will they return?" Amos's helmeted visage betrayed no relief. "Yes, and soon." He glanced at the dead in the trenches, jaws set in grim resolve. This was only the beginning. The next day dawned under sallow light that barely penetrated the persistent cloud cover. Evidence of the night's carnage was everywhere. Twisted remains of Necrons, piles of empty armor that dissolved into dusty residue, and the far more tangible corpses of militia and a few fallen Astartes. The survivors dug mass graves. The funeral pyres burned quietly. In a battered precinct fortress near the old city center, a war council convened. Master Amos presided, flanked by interrogator chaplain Malthus, while Captain Eleanor and a junior tech priest from the newly arrived Imperial reconnaissance convoy provided intelligence. "They are definitely Necrons of the Mefrit dynasty," the tech priest declared, adjusting his augmented ocular. "Energy signatures are consistent with Mefrit Gauss technology, and we have partial designations from archived data. Possibly an overlord known as Ankartan, though the records are incomplete." Malthus frowned. "The Mefrit are known as Star Killers, executioners. They do not conquer, they annihilate." "Indeed," the tech priest said. "If Overlord Ankartan sees Thalax Prime as part of his ancient domain, he won't stop until it's cleansed of all life." Amos scanned the hololithic display, a topographical map of Thalax showing mountainous regions, a sprawling desert known as the Obsidian Dunes, and the half-collapsed hive clusters. "We must be proactive," he said, voice taut with determination. "We can't just defend. We must find their tomb complex, the seat of Ankartan's power, and destroy it." At that, Elena cleared her throat softly. "My scouts speak of a labyrinth beneath the Obsidian Dunes. Old survey teams used to claim they saw glimpses of black metal structure under the sands. We always dismissed it as folklore. Perhaps it's their lair." Amos and Malthus exchanged a knowing look. "Then that's our target," declared the interrogator chaplain. "We purge it, or all of Thalax, indeed the entire subsector, may be lost." Yet in Amos's mind burned another hidden agenda. Malthus had quietly informed him of a rumor. A robed man who wore dark green heraldry had once been sighted in the planet's northern wastes decades ago. Possibly a fallen angel. The warp storms might have shielded him from detection, until now. And so the Dark Angels prepared a two-pronged approach. One force would fortify Nova Thalax to protect the battered populace. The other, led by the 5th Company's veterans, would strike into the Obsidian Dunes to locate the tomb complex. Malthus and Brother Sergeant Nestor volunteered for the expedition. That evening, while squads assembled Thunderhawks and land speeders on the outskirts of the city, Elena approached Nestor. "Thank you for saving my people last night," she said, her tone sincere but uncertain. "Without the Emperor's angels, we'd be overrun." Nestor inclined his head. "We do only our duty." He could see the pain in her eyes. She had lost many militia to the flayed ones. "How do we keep faith?" she asked quietly. "These Xenos, they rise again and again." Nestor's voice was soft through his helm's vox grill. "Faith is not easy in the face of such horror, but it is what defines us as humans. If the Emperor sees fit to send us here, then we must trust in his will." Elena nodded, lips pressed thin. "We have to trust, or we have nothing left." She stepped back, gripping her laser gun. "I'll ensure the city stands, Sergeant." A day later, a column of Dark Angels transports and outriders rumbled across the battered surface of Thalax Prime. Ravenwing bikes took point, scanning for ambushes. Thunderhawks soared overhead, dust storms swirling in their wake. Beyond the city limits, the land gave way to black sands that reflected the sun's dying rays with an otherworldly shimmer. The storms had abated somewhat, allowing the Sword of Caliban in orbit to provide limited overwatch. Yet warp interference still distorted communication beyond a certain range. Brother Sergeant Nestor traveled at the front with Ravenwing outriders, his Primaris helm scoured by biting sand. He spotted twisted metallic shapes half buried in the dunes, Necron obelisks or satellite pylons perhaps. The entire desert felt like a silent grave of ancient Xenos technology. "Keep your weapons primed," Nestor voxed to his men. "We are walking into the serpent's mouth." They pressed onward until the dunes rose into tall, sharp ridges. Heat shimmer filled the air. At the far end of a black valley, a rift in the rock revealed a cavernous opening rimmed with greenish crystals. Master Amos halted the column, lifting a gauntlet to signal silence. He conferred with Interrogator Chaplain Malthus, who studied a handheld Auspex. "Massive subterranean infrastructure," Malthus said in hushed tones. "Some kind of labyrinth. This must be the entrance to Ankatan's tomb." Before Amos could reply, a shriek of static burst across the vox. Then came a cold, metallic voice that lanced every channel. "Sons of the false emperor, you trespass upon ground consecrated by the Mefrit. Depart or be erased from existence." A hiss of static. Then the desert erupted with green flares. Necron warriors rose from hidden vaults, shimmering into existence through phase gates. Overhead, doom scythes, sleek Necron aircraft, swooped, loosing beams of gorse that carved molten trenches in the sand. "Form a perimeter," Amos ordered. Land speeders returned fire with assault cannons, peppering the metallic ranks. Bolter shells hammered into the first wave, slowing the Necrons. But across the dunes, more and more Xenos constructs awakened. Spine-chilling mechanical moans reverberated from the tomb entrance. The Dark Angels advanced, determined to break through. In the swirling dust, squads exchanged deadly fusillades with unstoppable ranks of living metal. Malthus, brandishing his Crozius Arcanum, led a charge of veterans, chanting liturgies of hate as they barreled into the enemy lines. "Repent, for tomorrow you die." Crushing blows from power fists caved in Necron carapaces, while plasma weapons hissed and spat, incinerating those that tried to reknit themselves. Still, the Necrons pressed relentlessly. Destroyer constructs hovered behind the front lines, spitting beams that cut even Astartes in half. Ravaged bodies fell, blackening on the burning sand. At the apex of this battle, a new figure emerged from the tomb's entrance. Tall, regal, draped in black metal filigree etched with solar motifs, carrying a staff crowned by a blazing green orb. "I am Ankatan. I herald the cleansing of this world." The Overlord's words echoed unnaturally across the dunes. A great wave of green energy arced from his staff, striking a half-dozen Dark Angels in a chain, forcing them to their knees, armor sizzling. Master Amos roared a challenge, charging forth with his relic power sword. His blow clashed against Ankatan's staff in a burst of sparks. The Overlord's metal visage was impassive, yet a flicker of anticipation glowed in his eyes. He parried Amos's second strike, then lashed out with a scythe blade hidden in the staff, scoring a deep gash across the Master's pauldron. Amos grunted, staggering back. Seeing their commander in peril, several Deathwing Terminators teleported in, a bold, short-range jump, and hammered Ankatan's bodyguards. The Overlord was forced to retreat a step, but before the Terminators could press the advantage, a swirling portal opened beneath their feet, dropping them momentarily into a hidden antechamber below. The dune collapsed. In seconds, the Overlord pivoted, unleashing beams that forced the others to scatter. "You shall not impede the will of the Mefrit," came his cold pronouncement. Meanwhile, Interrogator Chaplain Malthus glimpsed through swirling dust, a robed figure high on a rocky outcrop overlooking the skirmish. It wore no obvious power armor, yet it was broad-shouldered, holding what looked like a broken sword. For an instant, Malthus thought he recognized the remnants of a dark angel's insignia. "By the lion," he whispered, heart pounding. "The fallen." In that moment, he forgot all else. "Ravenwing, track that figure," he voxed. "He must not escape." But the figure vanished into a crevice as blasts of gauze strafed the ground. Malthus cursed. A Ravenwing land speeder soared overhead, searching, but found only dust and emptiness. Back in the main fight, Overlord Ankatan raised his staff in triumph, as if to conjure a final barrage. "All you love shall be dust, as it was foreseen." But at that moment, a flight of Dark Angel's Thunderhawks roared low, unleashing missile salvos that raked the Necron lines. The aerial strike forced the Overlord to break off, though not before sending a final wave of energy that crippled a land raider. With harsh metallic sibilance, the Necrons began another tactical phase-out, sinking back into the black sands. Though battered, the Dark Angels held the entrance to the tomb. The dunes smoldered in places from wrecked vehicles, and the wind carried the acrid stench of plasma burns. Master Amos knelt in the sand, clutching the wound in his pauldron. "We press on," he rasped. "Into the tomb. We end this." His eyes burned with fervor, and a flicker of frustration that the Overlord had escaped yet again. Behind him, Malthus stared at the rocky ridge where he had seen the phantom figure, a fallen angel. The chaplain's zeal flared, but for now, the tomb's threat took precedence. A wide tunnel sloped down into the planet's crust. The walls were neither stone nor metal, but an unholy fusion of both, studded with glowing glyphs. In the distance, eerie lights pulsed in rhythmic patterns, powering the subterranean catacombs. Brother Sergeant Nestor led a vanguard of Primaris Marines, their helmet lamps cutting through swirling dust motes. The deeper they ventured, the stronger the hum of Necron technology became. "Auspex is flickering," one Marine reported. "Interference from Xenos systems." Following behind were Interrogator Chaplain Malthus, Master Amos, and a small contingent of Deathwing Terminators. Here, in the claustrophobic corridors, the Terminator's bulk was both blessing and curse, impenetrable in defense, but slow in maneuver. Meanwhile, Ravenwing squads remained above to guard the entrance, while Captain Elena's militia, back at Nova Thalax, prayed for their success. Midway down a sloping hall, the architecture opened into a vast chamber ringed by stasis pods. Within each stood a dormant Necron warrior or immortal, tens of thousands by the look of it. The faint crackle of energy across their forms set every Marine's nerves on edge. "If they all awake at once," Nestor whispered. A small sign of worry from the relatively new sergeant. Malthus responded, "We must find their command nexus. Destroy it. Then perhaps these abominations remain asleep." A metallic scraping echoed from an adjoining corridor. The Dark Angels formed up, expecting an ambush. Instead, a half-dozen hunched shapes, Canoptech wraiths, phased through the wall, ephemeral tails trailing behind them. They attacked in a swift flurry of claws and lash whips. Terminator storm bolters roared, but the wraiths flickered out of phase, letting bolts pass harmlessly through them. One wraith coalesced mid-lunge, its blade limbs slicing a veteran's arm clean off. The Astartes collapsed with a groan, thick blood pooling on the slick floor. Amos lunged in, his power sword crackling as he timed a perfect strike. The blade bit deep into one wraith's core as it phased back, severing its coil. The creature shrieked with static before dissipating. Another wraith roared, swinging at Malthus, who barely blocked with his Crozius. The chaplain retaliated, smashing the wraith's head to shards. When the last wraith dissolved into green motes, the Dark Angels reformed ranks, the wounded brother quickly stabilized by an apothecary. "Onward," Amos ordered grimly. Their path was clear, deeper still, through labyrinthine tunnels studded with lethal traps. They pressed on for what felt like hours, passing silent crypts and massive assembly halls. Occasionally, a flicker of movement or an energy spike would lead to brief skirmishes with patrolling constructs. Each fight cost them time and sometimes blood, but they advanced step by step, leaving a trail of shattered Necron shells. At last, they arrived at a colossal chamber. The floor was etched with the sun emblem of the Mefrit dynasty, and a central dais crackled with raw energy. Over it, suspended by shimmering stasis fields, hovered a massive device resembling an inverted obelisk, brimming with swirling green plasma. "This must be their core generator, or something more dire," Amos said, eyes narrowing as he scanned the runes. "It could power an entire tomb city." Malthus, pressing a hand to the device's surface, hissed, "Or a weapon. The Mefrit are known for harnessing solar energies. Could they be shaping it to obliterate Thalax's crust?" Before they could act, a regal voice echoed behind them. "And so you walk willingly to your doom. How convenient." Overlord Ankartan emerged from a corridor on the opposite side of the chamber, flanked by towering Lich Guard, elite Necron warriors bearing war scythes. He lifted his staff, causing arcs of plasma to surge into the dais. The device pulsed, and a ring of green lightning sealed the perimeter, cutting off the Dark Angels from retreat. "So, this is your master plan," Amos spat, brandishing his power sword. "Mass genocide to prove your ancient pride." Ankartan's voice was eerily measured. "Your species is ephemeral, a flicker in the cosmic tapestry. Thalax Prime belongs to the Mefrit, as do all the lesser races that trespass. Your end is but a necessity of order." With that, the Lich Guard advanced, their scythes spinning in perfectly orchestrated arcs. The Dark Angels responded with bolter and blade, meeting the heavily armored Necrons with thunderous clashes. Lich Guard parried the Astartes' power weapons, returning strikes that could cleave even Terminator armor. Brother Sergeant Nestor fought at the forefront, bolt rifle spitting rounds into a Lich Guard's torso. The Xenos staggered but pressed on. He switched to his chainsword, blocking a downward slash that would have bisected him. Sparks flew as metal ground on metal. A second Lich Guard nearly flanked him, but a Terminator hammered it back. Amos and Ankartan clashed anew, a furious exchange of parries and counters. The Overlord's skill was inhumanly precise, his mechanical limbs never tiring. Amos's armor rent in places, but he battled with leonine wrath, determined to topple this self-proclaimed master of death. "Chaplain, the generator!" Amos shouted as he locked swords with Ankartan. "Destroy it if you can." Malthus nodded, rallying a small group of Marines to reach the dais. But a new threat emerged. A cryptek scuttled into view, an alien staff weaving a barrier of pulsing green that shielded the device. Malthus swung his Crozius, unleashing raw spiritual fury. The barrier flared, parted for a split second. Then the cryptek retaliated, unleashing a transdimensional bolt that vaporized one Marine's midsection. One step at a time, in a swirl of gore and shattered metal, the Dark Angels closed in on the dais. Nestor threw a crack grenade that stuck to the edge of the cryptek's barrier. The subsequent blast flickered the shield. Malthus seized the opening, bringing his Crozius down in a blow that shattered the cryptek's head. Its body collapsed into scrap. The dais field sputtered, revealing the device in full. Strange glyphs pulsed dangerously. Whatever energies it harnessed, they were building to a crescendo. "We must disable it," Malthus shouted, quickly reviewing the alien mechanism. "Set charges, or it may melt down." Meanwhile, Amos fought Ankartan with unyielding ferocity, staggering under a blow that scorched his chest plate. You cannot hold back an entire dynasty alone, Ankatan intoned, swinging again. Amos locked the blade with his sword, retorting, "We are the Emperor's vengeance, Xenos." He triggered his power sword's disruption field at max intensity, forcing the Overlord back. Sparks flew as Ankatan's staff cracked. But the Overlord, impossibly fast, lunged in a riposte that punched into Amos's side. Armor buckled with a tortured screech. The Master coughed blood as the Gauss blade scored his flesh. "Master!" Nestor roared, firing a salvo at Ankatan. The Overlord phased partially, letting some rounds pass. Another Marine tackled him, only to be slashed apart. Malthus had no time to help. The device was humming at an ear-splitting pitch, arcs of energy dancing across the dais. "Set the melter charges," he commanded. 2 veterans complied, placing the charges around the device's base. The readouts beeped, counting down. They needed time to prime. Amos, reeling, saw the meltdown risk. He locked eyes with Nestor. "Get our brothers out," he rasped. "But Master..." Amos rose shakily, power sword trembling in his grip. "That's an order, Sergeant." In that instant, Overlord Ankatan laughed coldly. "None of you shall leave this place." He raised his staff again, channeling energy that could detonate the device prematurely, or perhaps redirect it. One terrifying possibility was that Ankatan planned to blow the entire chamber and half the planet's crust. Master Amos refused to yield. Summoning the last of his strength, he lunged at the Overlord. The staff scythed at him, but the Master took the blow on his ruined pauldron, forcing the staff's angle away. Despite the searing pain, Amos plunged his power sword into Ankatan's chest cavity with a final, defiant roar. Sparks sprayed as the Overlord's necrodermis tore. For a split second, Ankatan's optics dimmed. "Impossible," he whispered in mechanical astonishment. Then a swirl of green energy enveloped him, as if he might phase out. Amos twisted the blade, anchoring him in place, preventing his escape. "You die with me," hissed Amos. Malthus's voice cut in the vox. "Charges armed. 30 seconds to detonation." "Fall back, all of you," Amos commanded across the channel, voice raw. "I will finish this." Nestor and the others hesitated, but Malthus, grim acceptance on his scarred features, ordered them to withdraw. The Dark Angel shot down the last Lich Guard and dashed for the corridor. Nestor paused, wanting to save Amos, but Terminators dragged him away, for the Master's voice had the final authority. In the dais chamber, the Overlord's free arm raked across Amos's chest, trying to sever him. Amos roared in agony, but held the Overlord pinned. The meltdown was imminent. The device's hum reached a crescendo. With a final, defiant, "For the Emperor," Master Amos unleashed all the power left in his sword, rending Ankatan's metallic torso wide open. In that moment, the melter charges went critical. A blinding flash consumed the dais, the Overlord and Master Amos in a violent eruption of plasma. The entire chamber rocked with cataclysmic force, collapsing in on itself. Up on the surface, the Dark Angels reeled as the ground shuddered. An entire section of the desert caved in, sending up plumes of black sand and energy discharge. For one horrifying minute, it seemed the seismic ripple might engulf them too. But the quakes subsided, leaving a massive crater behind. Interrogator Chaplain Malthus, kneeling on the dunes, recited a litany of mourning for Master Amos. The cost was unspeakable, but so too was the victory. The tomb complex's central generator was obliterated, likely taking Overlord Ankatan with it. "May the Emperor guard your soul," Malthus intoned, "and may you find absolution in death, brother." Sergeant Nestor stood, fists clenched, helm removed to feel the scorching wind on his face. Amos had saved them all. Indeed, saved Thalax Prime from total annihilation. But the weight of that sacrifice pressed on him heavily. The surviving Dark Angels regrouped, battered but unbroken. With their command node destroyed, the Necron threat across Thalax Prime faltered. Many Xenos either phased out or returned to stasis. Sporadic pockets of resistance lingered, but the worst was over. The planet for now was spared a final doom. Days later, Nova Thalax stood again as the seat of Imperial authority, albeit its streets still lined with rubble and countless graves. The Dark Angels had done what they could to help fortify the city in the short term. Captain Elena and her militia were left to rebuild, aided by a small detachment of administratum officials newly arrived from orbit. In the gloom of dawn, Thunderhawk transports idled on a landing pad near the battered city gates. Interrogator Chaplain Malthus oversaw the loading of fallen Astartes into stasis caskets. The chapter's banner flew at half-mast in honor of Master Amos. Nestor approached Malthus, newly promoted to acting company master by necessity. "Chaplain," he said quietly, "the tomb is silent. Our scans confirm the Overlord is gone. The planet is safe, but..." He hesitated. "Master Amos gave everything. We lost more than a leader. We lost a part of ourselves." Malthus clasped the younger Marine's shoulder. "We are the unforgiven. Loss is our constant companion. Take solace in the knowledge that his death was not in vain." He lowered his voice. "And the rumor of the fallen. It remains unresolved. We found no sign of that robed figure." Nestor exhaled. "Do we linger to search?" "No. Our oath demands we continue the hunt in the wider galaxy. Another time, perhaps. Thalax must recover. We have the Necrons scattered and no conclusive trace of the fallen. The secrets of the chapter will keep." They made their way onto the Thunderhawk's ramp. On a nearby platform, Captain Eleanor stood in her battered uniform, watching silently. Her city was half in ruins, but her people still lived, and for that she was grateful. She lifted an arm in a salute. Malthus and Nestor acknowledged her with curt nods. They were space marines, never fully comfortable receiving gratitude from mortals. Then the Thunderhawk engines roared, kicking up clouds of dust and debris. From the vantage of the open hatch, Nestor saw the battered hive spires receding. In his helm display he saw streams of data, casualty lists, strategic reports. The note, objective, fallen, unresolved. It left him uneasy. The constant overshadowing secret gnawed at him, though he did not yet fully comprehend it. All he knew was duty, the same duty that drove Master Amos to his final stand. High above, the sword of Caliban hung in orbit, and beyond it lay the unending expanse of war. The Fifth Company had once more sacrificed dearly to preserve an imperial world from Xenos. Yet in this uncaring universe, victory is seldom clean. Thalax Prime was saved from a star-killing overlord, but left scarred and haunted, forced to rebuild among ashes. Still, the planet was free to breathe Imperium air again, even if that air was tainted by the dust of 1,000,000 graves. For a moment, the faint warmth of a new dawn spread across the horizon, uncertain yet stubbornly present, an ember of hope in the endless darkness. And so the Dark Angels departed, bearing with them the memory of an honor redeemed through blood and fire, an overlord's ambition shattered, and a secret lead on the fallen that would draw them onward to yet more battles. The cycle of war continued, as it always does in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no peace among the stars, only an eternity of carnage and slaughter, and the laughter of thirsting gods. In the desolation of Thalax Prime, the dust settles upon countless graves. The Dark Angels depart with secrets unspoken, and the surviving people of this ravaged world begin to rebuild among the ruins. Yet even victory brings new questions. Where the Imperium stands, conflict endures, and the cry of war echoes across the stars. Thank you for listening to Of Angels and Ancients, The War for Thalax Prime. Subscribe to Grimdark Shards to experience more tales of sacrifice and ruin in the grim darkness of the far future. Remember, in this universe, hope is a luxury few can afford.